We all know that there have been issues with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in the NFL draft. But what can we learn from his past drafts? We don't have a huge data set, but there is some signal of how he handles the first round that can help us project forward. Welcome to the first SKOL search of 2025 on the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. This one being a SKOL search noon on a Friday. This is why we tell you, keep those notifications on, because when we got something good, we're going to talk about it. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, in the top left corner, he is producer Dave. We're going to have some fun here today. We are going to talk about the NFL draft. We're going to talk about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and we're going to talk about how things have grown and evolved over the course of his tenure. And I want to preface this because when it comes to this type of thing that I'm doing, we don't have a heavy enough data set to draw any concrete conclusions. It's only 4 picks in the first round, but we can start to see signal. And what that means is it's the beginning of something, beginning of a trend. And we think that this is going to become a constant because we've seen it multiple times already. So I'm trying to use this as a generic study guide kind of thing to, once the NFL draft comes around, this is going to happen. This is how we can project things forward. And I do think that that's a really interesting aspect of this because everybody has trends. Rick Spielman had thresholds. The Green Bay Packers have real strong thresholds that they adhere to. They loosen them up as the draft goes on, which most people do because, hey, you don't meet this threshold, but you're really good at everything else, you're going to be more likely to take that guy in round 3 than you are in round 1. So when we get more of those data points, we are going to include them. But for right now, we don't have a ton. And because we don't have a ton, we have to go with what we've got. And I do find that very interesting. I do find that very intriguing to kind of see how things build up. Dave, can you hear any beeping on your end?
I can.
Slack messages are going off right now. I need to pause them. I am pause notifications for 1 hour. There we go. That should be that should stop that here. But it's very interesting. Dave, you've had a chance to kind of read the piece. Was there anything before we really dive deep that kind of stood out to you?
The ages.
Okay. What about it kind of stood out?
That he goes for, in the first round, under 22.
Mm-hmm. And I do find that interesting. Jefferson, I believe, when he was drafted, was 20. When he started his rookie year, he was 21. And he's going to be able to sign a third contract, at the age of 28, if they do that extension. That's huge for team and player. Player gets to cash in multiple times. Team gets to have them on, in their prime for a longer period. Now, that doesn't mean age is everything. You don't take a player just because they're young. They have to be really good. And I think that aspect is what's really fascinating by this whole thing. The age is a secondary piece to the whole conversation. And I'm very interested in kind of how things are going to look progressing forward. And that's kind of what I did. I have a spreadsheet database built on Google Sheets, which I will update after this draft. I'm going to do a lot more of these types of pieces because I think it's interesting to kind of look at from a long-term perspective. It's interesting to look at from a shorter-term perspective. There are fascinating elements to this whole conversation. Let's kind of start at the top. There are only 4 first-round picks that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has made. It's Lewis Cine in 2022, 32nd overall. And that data point is going to be interesting, and I'll talk about why in a minute. Jordan Addison at 23rd, J.J. McCarthy at 10th, and Dallas Turner at 17th. The farther along you get in the draft, the less that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah cares about age. And it's easy to see why. Like, you're not getting premier prospects. You're not getting elite level talents. You're getting players who are flawed. And that doesn't mean they're bad, but it means they have something in their profile that knocks them down. Sometimes it's age, sometimes it's athleticism, sometimes it's they don't have production, but they have all the traits. Sometimes it's off the field stuff. Marzipan, stop eating that. That's cables. We don't do that. Get over here. And I do find it fascinating to kind of parse all that out. All right, you're coming up. Oh, there we go. There she is. She's a marzipan. So Lewis Cine is the oldest prospect at 22.6 years old. I don't like have the exact dates, but it's around 22.6 because like I don't think the minutia of 0.6 versus 0.65 or 0.55 matters a whole lot.
Right.
What matters is, I'm talking about like how old they are. And James, I was just using the age description. Kwesi didn't pick Jefferson. We all know that. But I do think like Jefferson is the perfect example of the age discussion. Why you take players that are super young because of the success he's had, and now third contract likely before the age of 30.
Hey, it's a good theory or a good practice to do that because you're getting him through more of his prime.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's talk about the things that we can really draw from the first round. The first thing that I noticed is the Minnesota Vikings have made 4 trades involving first round picks. They traded from 12 to 32 to get Lewis Cine. They did not trade the Jordan Addison pick despite having many offers, and that was talked about live at the time. They traded up to 10 to get McCarthy. They traded up to 23rd and then up to 17, and that's how they got Dallas Turner. So it seems very likely that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is going to trade again. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee. He's a market trader. You have to find something that works. You have to find something that of value in order to make a move like that. Now, the Vikings might be a little bit more desperate than they would in past years to make a trade because they only have 4 picks right now. But I did find something interesting.
And they've also got to identify a trade partner.
Yeah, that's a whole part of it too. Like when we do mock drafts on the simulator, you can force trades, but you have to find a team that's willing to take an offer. Just because, like, we've talked about this with player trades. They found somebody to take Ed Ingram for a 6th. They didn't find anybody to take Garrett Bradbury for something they were willing to trade him for. And it's really difficult because when you have that conversation about like player trades, player can be worth X, but if no team's willing to give you X, they're not worth X because there's other factors like age and money involved as well. So nobody was willing to give the Vikings requisite value. Plus, if you take too low of a deal, teams are just going to lowball you like crazy and they're not going to give you proper value. So there's checks and balances to that whole process. That's why I rarely criticize a team for not being able to execute a player trade because there's so many different factors that we are just not privy to. It's a tough one. But when looking at some of these trades, and I wrote a long piece last year after day 1 in the NFL draft for Arif's Wide Left. If you have not subscribed, please do. Arif does phenomenal work. And it is on there. It's about, I want to say 2,000 words talking about every single trade he's made in the draft. And it's still relevant because he has not made another draft day trade since I wrote that piece right after the Dallas Turner trade. It depends on what trade you're looking at because some trades he objectively wins based on analytics boards. Some people he objectively wins based on like the standard boards, the Jimmy Johnson, the Rich Hill. And it's very interesting to kind of look at it. They technically lost value on the Jets trade across all trade charts, but it's for a quarterback that's viewed on a different level. Okay. They won on the analytics charts one time, which was the Lions trade. They won on the standard trade charts twice, which was the trade up with Houston and then the trade up with Jacksonville. So his process about using these trades has been different across the board because it's a different kind of thing. All right. You have different market expectations. You have different players that you're utilizing. And those all factor in. So that part is fascinating to parse out, fascinating to kind of see what will end up happening. But trade is very likely for the Minnesota Vikings. So that's point number one. Point number two, Dave, Power 4 schools. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has only selected 2 players not from a Power 4 school. 2023 7th round pick Dwayne McBride. 2024 7th round pick Levi Drake Rodriguez. The other 20 picks, all Power 4 schools. You can make the argument that technically Jaren Hall wasn't a Power 4 school because BYU was an independent, basically playing a Power 4 schedule. And then the year Jaren Hall was a rookie, BYU joined to the Big 12. You can make that argument for ease sake because of what BYU was playing. They were playing a Power 4 schedule. So I'm including them in the Power 4, plus they're currently in a Power 4 conference. So he does not take players that don't play at high levels of college football. What's also interesting about that is the draft picks in the first round are from 2 conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, Jordan Addison technically was from the Pac-12 when he was drafted, but USC is currently in the Big Ten. And the reason why I kind of grouped it that way is because you want teams that play a high level of competition. You want the theory is take players that play a high level. It'll be easier for them to transition and they will have had better coaching. Better coaching then means easier to transition, and you give them better coaching now. It just makes things a hell of a lot better and a hell of a lot simpler with less variables. And that's a big part of the whole draft conversation. Less variables. You want less variables in there. Chris Miller says, I can't wait for the Purple Daily Draft Party. I'm going to strictly get Forno so drunk that he believes he was drafted. Our nipples will be bleeding. Hey, that is a busy work day for me. I will gladly have some cocktails. Last year, I think I was sipping on Crown Apple and water. Oh, I love me a good
Well,
Crown
Biggs
Apple
talks
water.
about watching us after that in the evening. We're going live.
Yep. Sometime between 11 and midnight. I will give Dave a call when I leave. And then when I leave, it'll be about in 45 minutes. Because the Fillmore is about 35 minutes from my house, give or take 10 minutes, to get settled in, get set up, tell my wife hello, goodbye, because I've barely seen her at all, because I don't think she's coming to the Purple Daily Draft Party. She might. We'll find out, but yeah, we're going to go live, and we're going to talk about the first round, and then we may have a show Friday morning, because I'm an absolute degenerate, and Dave supports me. So we're going to have a lot coming for you draft weekend. It's going to be a hell of a great time. But
can I back up and talk about trades real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's one scenario you did not cover, except for you sort of did. When Addison was there, they grabbed him. They wanted him. They grabbed him.
Yep.
Didn't move. There's a possibility in 2024 or 2025 trade here in a month that somebody they fall in love with drops to number 24.
Yep.
And they do not trade. They go run to the podium and say, hey, we're drafting Ashton Genty or whomever it may be.
Yeah, I do think that's a real possibility. I don't know who they would love. And I told, at the end of the article, I grouped a bunch of players that I think the Vikings will be interested in based on who I expect to be there. Everybody knows I do a lot of mock draft research, and I do the mock draft tracker every week. And I don't use the consensus boards that are out there until Arif puts his out, because I believe Arif's is the far and away the best and most comprehensive. So I want to wait to see that. I want to wait to know, hey, this is what's going on. This is who's going to be there. And I think there's going to be one or two players that they're just in love with. But the weird thing about this class, Dave, is it's relatively flat after like pick 10. So you would have to truly believe that they are like a true blue chipper. And I've been on record saying that I think there will be about 50 players that are given a first round grade by a team, but each team will only have around 10 to 12 because it's just so flat from like 10 or 20 to 70 that the player you get at like 50 is going to be not much different than at 20, which is why the Vikings might want to move back. It's also why teams might not want to move up. But there's always going to be one prospect for every team that's like, I need that guy. Like draft day. Sonny Weaver Jr. writes down Vontae Mack no matter what. GMs are like that, where they're like, I'm taking this guy no matter what. Like the Vikings were taking Garrett Bradbury pretty much no matter what in 2019. That happens. So we'll end up finding out if they have a guy that they absolutely love. I would think that if they make a trade, they're going to trade future picks, not this year's picks. So if they move up to like 17, maybe they offer next year's 2 to go up like 7 spots because they have extra ammo to do it. They're going to be missing next year's 4th, but they have a comp 4th. They have a comp 3rd coming. And then they could have another comp 3rd coming if they lose out on Brian Flores because of the minority hiring angle that if you lose a minority to a head coaching job or a general manager job, you get 2 first-round picks. 2 third-round picks. 1 in back-to-back years. If you lose a head coach and a GM in the same year, you get them in 3 consecutive years. You don't get like 2 and 2. So I found that part interesting because I'm like, okay. And it's an initiative put in place because people just aren't hiring enough. We're not giving enough opportunities to minorities. And we won't get into that, but that's just how things are written currently. So it'll be interesting to see how they want to maneuver the trade market. Theoretically, it's cheaper to trade future assets than it is to trade current assets. A second-round pick this year is worth more than a second-round pick next year. The theory is when it comes to trades, you want to deduct a round per year out. So a second-round pick next year is worth a 3rd this year. Second-round pick in 2 years is worth a 4th next year. Or the 4th round pick. So it'll be interesting. I don't know how they'll deal with trades, but I'm going to really, really pay attention to that. But yeah, it's interesting that Dallas Turner and Lewis Cine came from Georgia and Alabama, both teams who have won national championships, multiple in the last decade, and USC and Michigan, where USC is an emerging program again after being in the doldrums for a decade, and then you have Michigan who literally just won a national title. So power conferences are going to be a big thing. And let's talk a little bit more about age. Age matters because of the contract structure like we talked about earlier. It's not I have to have this kind of thing, but it is a huge benefit to you if the prospect you love is young. If the prospect you love is about to turn 21, that gives you an advantage. It gives you an edge because you're going to have them for significantly more of their prime. And that's a great thing. But if they end up being 22, not the end of the world. Really isn't. But it's something that the Minnesota Vikings have taken to heart in the first round. Or in the top 45 picks, they have made 5 selections. Only 1 has been over 22. That was Lewis Cine at 22.6. Andrew Booth Jr. was the only on-first round pick in that group. Andrew Booth was 21.6 years old. So he was younger. J.J. McCarthy, Dallas Turner, and Jordan Addison were all 21.25 years old approximately. Remember, as I said earlier, I just use approximate ages. It's interesting. It's interesting, but it's also something that Andrew Berry with the Cleveland Browns does.
And it's
later on,
than taking some player that's went through his COVID years and he's just graduating after 7 years of college football play.
Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing, the COVID factor. The COVID factor is a huge portion proponent of this. We're finally going to be out of the COVID stuff. Like after this year, it's pretty much going to be non-existent, which thank God. But for extra context, the Vikings have been more willing to forego age later on. Of the Vikings' day 3 picks, only 4 have been under the age of 23. And one of their day 2 picks, Ed Ingram, was 23.1 when he was drafted. Caleb Evans in the 4th round of 22 was 22.8. Jay Ward in the 4th round of 23 was 22.8. Jaquelin Roy of the 5th round of 2023 was 22.5. And Dwayne McBride in the 7th round of 23 was 21.6. Kyrie Jackson would have been 25 when the season started this past year, but unfortunately we know he passed away tragically. Jaren Hall was 25.1 when he was drafted. He served a 2-year Mormon mission and then played 5 years at BYU. So I always argued that he had more the football body of a 23-year-old because a Mormon mission, you're not doing athletic stuff other than ride a bike. Like, it is very strict. You're doing religious stuff for 2 years. And that's a big factor here when you're talking about age. I wasn't worried about age with him nearly as much, but that is kind of what we're looking at here for age. And there's more, Dave. The next one is going to be have a little bit more ambiguity. And I'm classifying it as movement skills. And the first draft that Kwesi did, the big thing was 10-yard split. Everybody had a fast 10-yard split. And I do think that is a part of the movement skills. They love players who can move very, very well. And they've drafted players who can move very, very well. Lewis Seen had a 99.8th percentile 10-yard split. Dallas Turner a 90.3rd. And their 40-yard times, Seen was 98.8th percentile. Turner 99.7th percentile. So we're talking buku fast. Buku fast. Now, one thing that's interesting when you're having these conversations is, like, McCarthy didn't test, but he's also a quarterback. So his really don't count that much because it's a quarterback. Nobody cares if a quarterback can run fast. Can you scramble and elude defenders every now and then? It's more about pocket management and stuff than it is about truly being an elite athlete outside of structure. Now, being an elite athlete outside of structure is a good thing, and we want that. But I don't need that. I don't need you to be an elite athlete outside of structure. I need you to do the little things. And I thought he could do that. He was also 96th percentile 3-cone, which I just think this is going to sound like a mean joke, but it's not. There's something in the water in Ann Arbor, because I know the Flint, Michigan. That's not what I mean. Like, they produce elite athletes that are phenomenal at the 3-cone. Just phenomenal. And it's consistent. Like Aiden Hutchinson in one of the fastest 3-cones ever. Kenneth Grant, fast 3-cone. Kwity Paye, fast 3-cone. Like, they're just on a different level. Now, the interesting part about movement skills when we also talk about Jordan Addison, Dave, well, he was not the same mover, okay? He did not test super well. He had like a relative athletic score of like 56th percentile. 40-yard dash, 77.8th percentile. 10-yard split, 73.3rd percentile. Short shuttle, 75.8th percentile. 3-cone, 52.5 percentile. It wasn't the athletic testing that did it. It was more of the GPS tracking, which I have not been able to find the super specifics to confirm that. So I didn't really write about it, but I do remember at the time that there was a big thing about how GPS was a big factor in the selection of Jordan Addison. But speed isn't really a huge difference maker for wide receivers. Just have enough of it. Get open, create separation, make things easy for the quarterback to get you the football. And Jordan Addison's got phenomenal movement skills. Similar archetype to Justin Jefferson, and why drafting like similar wide receivers isn't like being redundant isn't a bad thing. They wanted to draft a guy on the outside to take advantage of it when Justin Jefferson was double and triple teamed. They got it with Addison. A quote from O'Connell on draft night: "I think it's very important that any receiver that plays in our offense, regardless of personnel group, when you're in the game with Justin Jefferson, for us to have the ability to move him around and then activate you versus some of the premier coverage looks you can get with how people defend Justin. I think Addison gives us a chance to do a lot of different things. And then pair him with KJ Osborne at the time, possibly working against single coverage and working away from some of the overload looks that Justin tends to see. We want to make people pay for that. That's why when you have a great receiver, you double down and get another one. And you should maybe triple down and get a third. It matters. It's a factor. And I do think that it's very interesting that they said that, but it also tells you that they really believed in his movement skills. They believed in his ability to move incredibly well as an elite athlete on the field, even though the generic metric testing said he was just a good athlete. This is why GPS data matters. Game speed is different than track speed. Addison can consistently stack receivers down the field. Stack corners, I mean. It'd be hilarious if he stacked receivers. That would be funny. And he can get open with quickness. He can get open with twitch. He can get open with speed. He can do a little bit of everything to get open and give the quarterback a place to put the football. That matters. Matters a hell of a lot. And those movement skills are really, really important. I think it's the most important thing when it comes to how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah drafts in the first round. He wants you to be an elite mover for what you play. But how they've gotten there has been different. They got there with Dallas Turner and Lewis Cine based a lot on, I mean, the tape is obviously the tell-all, but the metrics also proved it too. But with Addison, it was more about, hey, GPS and metrics. How are we going to maximize? How are we going to do this? And that's important. It's important to really have that discussion as we're parsing this all out. I think movement skills are going to be the most important thing when it comes to who's taken. This is why I'm also out on Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama. He can't move.
Now I heard you this morning on Luke's show, Locked on Vikings, and he's got a different opinion.
We haven't really talked about Booker, so I'm excited. We're probably going to do that next week. Booker's a phone booth guy. You remember that horror or that suspense movie Phone Booth from like 2001, Dave? Where if the guy hangs up in a phone booth, a sniper's going to shoot him. Like, if you put Booker in a phone booth, he's going to murder you. You're done. But if you ask him to get out of the phone booth, you have problems because he cannot move. He cannot aim. He overcommits. He can't stop and halt his momentum to be able to grab like a seal block or something. He just can't do it. And this isn't like, I know I've always been like guards don't matter kind of thing. This isn't that kind of thing. If he could move, I think it'd be a really good pick because you have to have at least Ed Ingram level movement skills in order to play in this offense. You just do. And he doesn't. So I think movement skills are going to be huge. But those are like the main things. I do think there's a couple more nuances. And I wrote this. It's worth noting that so far the Vikings have only taken players at positions of need and premium positions specifically over the last 3 years. They took safety at 32, but the last 3 years it's been edge, wide receiver, and quarterback. But I also think that means edge and inside linebacker might not be in play like the others, but I'm not willing to rule it out because technically both Van Ginkel and Pace are going to be free agents after the year. Pace is a restricted free agent, so it's going to be a lot easier to keep him around. There's one thing that I do believe that is really important, and I'm going to reiterate this. This is a very, very, very small sample size. I'm not drawing any concrete conclusions because one piece of data, it just brings it to 5 and it can change everything. But it gives us a semblance of understanding of how we can project things forward. And I do find that interesting. I did identify 9 players that I believe could realistically make it to 24, and why I think that they could be a factor. Alabama linebacker Jahad Campbell, Georgia edge / linebacker Jalen Walker, because he's like an Andrew Van Ginkel type. Georgia safety Malachi Starks, Michigan defensive tackle Kenneth Grant, Missouri wide receiver Luther Burden III, Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolan, Oregon defensive tackle Derek Harmon, South Carolina safety Nick Imanwori, And a player we haven't talked about at all, Texas A&M edge Nick Scorton, who will not be 21 until the summer. That's a guy that he's also hyper athletic, really good football player, but he's super young. And maybe that's something that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah decides, you know what? We're going to get that guy. So those instances, I think, are very interesting. Those are the prospects. Right now, I'm willing to say, hey, these are the guys that I believe are going to be of interest to the Vikings at this spot. That could change. We could get some more information. If a guy like Shamar Stewart is there, I think he would be, but I think he's going top 10. And that's why I didn't include guys like him. You're also going to notice that there are no cornerbacks in here. Jahdae Barron's 23. Siobhan Revel's about to be 23, and he also played at a G5 school. Will Johnson, I don't expect to get this far. And he's over 22. He's like 22 and a half. At Maxwell Hairston, I don't think fits the bill at all as far as play style. So I did not include him. He can't tackle. You can't have a corner that struggles at tackling on this defense. That's just not how it works. So the fact that there's no corner is very interesting. So it's kind of what I have so far. I think this is a really fascinating angle to kind of take to look at when it comes to Kwesi, because there's different elements at work here. There are so many different factors as Marzipan is snoring that you can really look at to be like, hey, I think I can try and project forward. And what's really interesting is like all this data I got just by doing research. I don't have anything sourced. Like this is just my projections and trying to read between the lines, because that's a big thing with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. We talked about this the other night when talking about like the Aaron Rodgers stuff. He is such an articulate, intentional thinker and speaker. Everything he says and does means something, and there's a reason why. He doesn't just say things to say things. Everything is thought out. And I really appreciate having a general manager that is so thoughtful like that. He's not perfect. He has improving to do, but he's very good at what he does. And I really do like that about him. And I think that the Minnesota Vikings are in a good place, and they can continue to grow. They can continue to evolve and figure out how to make this better. It's interesting when it comes to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I wonder how he's going to approach this first round. Like, I do think age is going to be a factor, and I think movement skills. All these guys are incredible movers. Derek Harmon is really good mover, and like Walter Nolan's a really good mover. Kenneth Grant's a great mover for his size. Malachi Starks had average athletic testing, but on film, fantastic athlete and mover. And he was elite for 3 years.
And of course, the GPS data, we don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
Could bump somebody up like Addison.
Of course. And I do I want to see how this all plays out. I really do. Because we could get a curveball. Now, it's worth noting there are no offensive linemen on this list. I have not watched like Kelvin Banks yet. I will watch him. Gray Zabel, I think, is out because he's an FCS guy. Josh Simmons, maybe, but I don't think he projects super well to guard. I think he's more of a tackle, so they might be out on that if they were to go offensive line. It's fascinating. This whole thing is a great discussion. Dave, before we get out of here, do we have any questions or comments in the chat? Because I kind of have not paid as much attention as I would have liked to the chat, just because there's so much that I about this that I had to talk about.
The only one I starred was Daniel Faw asked, RAS movement, I'm assuming raw athletic score. Do the Vikings look at that metric a lot?
Which metric?
RAS.
So relative athletic score is an imperfect system. it does not account for some things on the fringes. It does not account. Like, I think it uses too much, like, with height and weight, and doesn't do enough to just compare, like, metrics across the board. It's very interesting. I don't think they use relative athletic score, but I do think they have their own models where they use that data and try to see who's a really good athlete or not. But yeah, RAS is a great baseline tool. I wouldn't use it as gospel.
And it's available to us. That's what I don't like about the GPS data is it's not available to us. We can look at RAS. We can look at the combine times and all that sort of stuff. But it used to be big when Spielman was here before we got all these in-depth tracking stuff.
Yeah. I wish we had GPS data available. Oh my gosh, that would tell us everything.
Now, for Sunday on Two Old Bloggers, Darren and I are going to continue sort of with this theme. However, we're taking a different bent. We're looking at the players that the Vikings have met with, whether it be through the All-Star circuit or combine or top 30 visits, etc. And we are comparing where they may fall in the draft plans of Kwesi. Round 1, round 3, 6s, UDFAs, all that sort of stuff. Now, what is interesting about it, just running the raw numbers, over 50% of them are offensive line and running backs when you add the two groups up. The biggest group is offensive line. Now, did that change once free agency is over? And we obviously beefed up the offensive line? You'll have to watch to find out. Sunday at 4.
It's going to be a good Two Old Bloggers. It's going to be great to have on volume while you watch college basketball in the Elite Eight. It's going to be a fun weekend. Thank you guys so much for joining. We keep telling you, this is why you need to have those notifications on, because you want to know when we go live. This is why you want to subscribe and ring that bell, because we are going to have a lot more of this. It's going to be a heck of a lot of fun over the next few weeks. We're going to have a great time talking about the Minnesota Vikings, talking about the NFL draft, and having a great discussion about everything Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Chris Miller, as we go, asked me if I have a drug preference for the draft party. Yes, Leinenkugel Summer Shandy would be my drug of preference. As we break 100 viewers live here, we're gonna have more of these. I'm gonna have more pieces. I'm gonna talk about like day 2, day 3, talk about different positions and what we can learn from them. But the positions are going to be a lot less fluid. So we're going to have a lot of fun. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us on a Friday afternoon. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. Marzipan's in my lap. Bodie's on the floor. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone.